Welcome to Power Hour.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's start off with, this is going to be about challenges. Of course, even within the challenges, I think we'll have quite a bit of agreement. But why don't we start off with, you have generously endorsed fossil future, moral case for fossil fuels, so you're anything but a detractor of mine. Why don't you start off with what do you think we have in common and are aligned on?
If you think about what to do on a policy level on an incremental basis, if we over the next 5-10 years dial the world towards fewer fossil fuels, we agree that will probably be a far more, a lower growth, poorer, more regulated, more authoritarian, less free world. And if you dial it to higher fossil fuel production and consumption, we will have, we'll have a better world on a horizon of the next decade. And so, sort of in our analysis of what happens at the margins, as you do somewhat more, somewhat less, I think we're in very violent agreement. I think a lot of the specific arguments about how environmentalism has been hijacked in this very anti-science, anti-future, anti-human way. I'm incredibly sympathetic to you, and then I think the probably the there's sort of a lot of subtle disagreements, but if I had to summarize them, I don't think that it is somehow the panacea for all of our problems, and that there are sort of ways that we cannot just rely on fossil fuels to get to the future, and that's not exactly what you say, but
Yeah.
There is some sense in which we need to do things that are very different. If I had to maybe concretize this with some intuitive numbers, the U.S. has 340 million people. The world's about 8 billion. It's something like 25 times the U.S. population, and I'm not sure what the exact number is. U.S. consumes maybe 15, 16 million barrels a day of oil. So 25 times that would be 400 million. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil a day. And so if we said that there should be some ideal future where the rest of the world gets to the U.S. standards of living. Our living standards go up, but let's say the rest of the world, deserves to, should, converge to U.S. living standards. And I don't think 400 million barrels a day is achievable. I don't think there's enough oil. I think if you actually try to produce that much, the money would flow to all the wrong people in the Middle East, other places. There are all sorts of crazy things that would happen.
Do you take me as, because you mentioned that I sort of said this, but then, so do you take that as my argument that we should be using 400 million, or am I not disavowing that enough?
I take your argument in mind to be in agreement that if we go from 100 million barrels a day and we have a choice, do we go to 110 or do we go to 90? Surely the world where we go to 110 is better than the world where we go to 90. So
well, most people are saying we should go way below 90.
Way below that, but I'm just doing the marginal,
right. So at the
marginal argument.
Yeah.
And of course, people say we should go down fast, but in practice, we're going to go down slowly or up slowly. But then I think that even going to 110, 120 is not going to be enough, and that's why, in my way of thinking about the energy future, much more of the weight does have to be put on alternatives. I probably would always put the stress on nuclear power, maybe fusion power. Those were what I think were supposed to be the energy sources of the 21st century, and that's what's really gone wrong. If we don't get nuclear or fusion, we're not going to make up for it with solar or windmills, and we're going to have to increase oil and natural gas and that sort of production for the next decades. But I don't think it will be enough to ever get India, the emerging market countries, to get to a U.S. standard of living.
Let me make a general point about this, and then with hydrocarbons in particular. So the general thing I'm trying to get, and I think we're in agreement with this, but it's important, is that resources are created and they're potentially limitless. Like, I really do think of the world as a ball of matter and energy. the more knowledge we get about how to manipulate it, how to transform it, the more we can harness. And this tends to open up very big new frontiers. And so in general, the argument isn't, well, we're going to get to 400 million barrels a day of oil, but maybe it's that there's some form of energy that we can harness if we're free, and that the way to get to nuclear is to be using more fossil fuels and to have more freedom. So I think I have a general optimism about that. When I say fossil future, it's not, but let me say one thing about fossil fuel resources. It's not an exclusively fossil future. It's in the context of, I'm arguing in two contexts. One is people are saying we should rapidly eliminate it, and I'm trying to say, no, this is very wrong, and we need to expand it. So, the subtitle is Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More. It's not 4 times more, and I explicitly talk about needing more energy and having alternatives, but alternatives are usually seen as means of replacing fossil fuels,
Sure.
whereas I think of them as means for the foreseeable future of expanding.
I agree with that, although I think, I think one always, I'm always hesitant to be quite as abstract as you are here. So I think you have.
Well, I wanted to make it concrete.
But the concrete where I would be skeptical is I don't think, I'm not sure there is a limitless amount of oil. I'm not sure there's a limitless amount of relatively cheap oil. And so, so if you were to double the oil production, I think that would cost a lot more. And I think you do have some kind of resource limits to growth,
well, but
or very strange things happen. If you take the pre-oil history, where 19th century was powered by coal, and there was some limit to a coal economy. By Britain in 1910, 1911, there were 15 million people in the workforce, 1 million were working in the coal mines, and somehow the marginal cost reduction went up, and it finally hit a trigger point where the coal workers all went on strike. The Labour Party got created, and the whole political economy of the UK shifted radically to the left. And so if you had an overly cornucopian view of coal, which was the free market view in the late 19th, early 20th century, you didn't see that labor strike coming, and you didn't see the way in which the UK would become a socialist country. So yes, I think energy in the abstract, there are alternate sources we can develop. There's no reason that there are any hard limits on oil specifically. I'm not so sure it's different from coal.
So yeah, so I mentioned I was going to say the abstract point and then concretely about hydrocarbons, because I agree it's not enough to be abstract, but I think sometimes people looking at the concrete picture don't think broadly enough because they don't have a sufficient appreciation for resource creation. So let's take oil, but I think the way to think of oil is as a liquid hydrocarbon. That's really what we mean. That's really what we need, right? We need this very stable liquid fuel that performs these amazing functions that nothing else does. But I think if you think about it from that perspective, you have to be open to, particularly if we had a much freer world, the ability to cost effectively convert coal into liquid hydrocarbon. And indeed, there are companies today, I don't know if they can do it, but they claim to be able to cost effectively divide coal into a very clean solid, into its gaseous elements, into its liquid elements. They claim to be able to do it cheaply. I don't know if these particular companies can, but I'll bet somebody could if we had more of a focus on hydrocarbon. And coal, whatever happened in England, is effectively unlimited today. I mean, coal is super easy to get. It has many advantages over oil in terms of discovery and production. Oil, you got to find these I love oil, but coal is just, it's there, it's easily accessible. So if we have the technology to really refine coal, I think that's a huge potential breakthrough. And then with natural gas, if methane hydrates under the ocean, we can potentially liquefy those. So I think that we need to be more open to resource creation, both within the realm of hydrocarbons, not limiting ourselves to, it has to be liquid when it comes out of the ground. It just needs to be liquid when we use it. And then if you go even more broadly, well, with other things like nuclear, you could synthesize hydrocarbons in different ways. And then I think people tend to have a frozen view of nuclear. They just think, it's just the light water reactors. It's just this one thing. I think where we're in common is we both want the policies where these things can proliferate. But I do tend, even people in the oil industry, they tend to narrowly think, you can't go to $400 million barrel a day, but maybe you could go to 400 million of liquid hydrocarbon using all of these different options.
Yeah, again, we'd have to drill down on those numbers a lot. Where there are probably forms of pollution you get from coal, not just the carbon dioxide emission, but
Well,
all
with
these
these
other ways.
processes, you actually eliminate those at the beginning because you're refining it.
It's always a question. There was a very coal-intensive economy, a la China, is polluted. It's a horrifically polluted country, and it's not the CO2. It's
By
everything
our
else.
standards, yeah. Not compared to what we used to live in. But.
And I think, and so I do think there's probably, my intuition is that there are some resource constraints, and if you don't get to the resource constraints, you get to some kind of pollution constraint, which is why I don't think the hydrocarbon piece by itself will work, even though those are the variables we'd have to drill down on. I think at the margin, at the margin, it would be good to do somewhat more. I think the realistic debate is between somewhat more and somewhat less. It's not between 400 million and zero. It's 110 versus 90. And in terms of the realistic place where that might go, we're very much in agreement.
But